They laughed at her again that morning, the two daughters of the house, watching from the cool of the veranda as Nkechi knelt in the dust and scrubbed the long stone steps by hand. Folake flicked a date pit at her hair and called her the floor's own daughter. Remy laughed so hard she had to hold the rail. Nobody in that rich trading town of Idanre knew what hung on a frayed cord beneath the maid's rough dress. A small brass locket, green with age, the only thing her dying mother ever pressed into her hands. Nobody knew that 3 days' ride away, in the grandest house of the Gold Roads, an old chief was burning through his last strength, searching for a lost granddaughter. And the face painted inside that cheap, forgotten locket was the face he had wept over for 16 years. A guest crossing the courtyard slowed. His eyes caught the worn crest stamped on the brass, and his cup stopped halfway to his mouth. So who was the girl on her knees in the dust? And what kind of cruelty buries an heir under a scrubbing brush and teaches her to thank you for it? Sit close, friend. And before the lamp is lit, tell me which country you're hearing this from tonight. Drop it in the comments. The story is about to turn. To understand the locket, you have to understand the town that never once looked at it. Idanre was built on gold. Not the soft gold of kings in old songs, but the working gold of traders. Dust weighed on small brass scales, nuggets sewn into belts, caravans that came down the dry roads with salt and left heavy with ore. The town sat where 3 trading routes met, and the dust of those routes lay over everything. The market stalls, the flat clay roofs, the throats of the men who haggled from dawn until the heat drove them indoors. Wealth here was not quiet. It announced itself in painted doorways, in the gold rings stacked to the knuckle. In the size of the household a family could afford to feed. The greatest of those households, far up the northern road, belonged to Chief Adewale of the House of Idanre. His name opened gates in 5 towns. His caravans were the longest, his word in a trade dispute was law, and his storerooms held enough to carry the whole district through a bad season. Men bowed when his litter passed. Yet anyone who came close enough to see his face in those last years saw a rich man wearing the eyes of a poor one, the look of someone who has everything except the single thing he wants. 16 years he had carried it, the grief that gold could not buy back. It began with his daughter. Morenike was her name, his only child by the wife he had loved best, and the people who remembered her said she had a laugh that could fill a courtyard and a will harder than any man's. She fell in love with the wrong person, a poor scribe with ink-stained fingers and no land to his name. And when her father forbade the match, she did not weep or beg. She simply walked out of the great house one night with a small bundle and the child already growing inside her, and she did not come back. Adewale's pride did what pride always does. It told him she would return when hunger taught her sense. It told him a season, then a year, then another. By the time his pride finally broke and he sent riders to find her, the trail had gone cold across too many roads. What the riders brought back, much later, was worse than silence. Morenike had borne a daughter and named her, and then a fever had taken the scribe, and then poverty had taken Morenike herself in some far market town, and the child, the granddaughter, the last drop of his own blood, had simply vanished into the crowd of the poor, where no one counts the children, and no one writes their names. He searched after that the way only a guilty man can search. For years his gold went out in every direction. He paid criers in distant markets to call a description no one answered. He sent trusted men to follow rumors that always melted into nothing. He kept in a locked chest the one thing that might prove her if she were ever found, the twin of a locket he had given Morenike as a girl, the two of them made as a matched pair, each carrying inside it a tiny painted likeness of her mother's face. One locket had gone into the dark with his daughter. The other waited in the chest, growing tarnished, for a hand that never came. Now the chief was old, and the cough that shook him in the night was the kind that does not heal. The vultures of his own household had begun to circle, quietly, politely, the way well-fed men circle a dying man's fortune. Everyone in the great house had already started to imagine the gold as theirs, and down the southern road, in a lesser town, in a courtyard he had never seen, his granddaughter was on her knees scrubbing another woman's steps, wearing his daughter's face and his daughter's locket, and answering to a name that was not her own. She had no idea a search existed. He had no idea it had already ended. The only question left was which of them would learn the truth first, and who in that great hungry house would do anything to make sure neither of them ever did. Down that southern road in the town of Oka, the girl they called Ninkechi woke each day before the cockerels and slept long after the lamps went dark. She had not always lived this way. Her mother, thin, coughing, gentle to the end, had kept the two of them alive by mending clothes in a rented room, and had died when Ninkechi was 9, leaving her a single instruction and a single object. The instruction was this: guard the locket, and never sell it, no matter how empty your belly. The object was the locket itself. Madame Bisola, a cloth merchant's widow with 2 daughters and a sharp eye for free labor, had taken the orphan in, not from mercy, as she loved to remind the whole street, but as a debt the girl could spend her life repaying. Repay it Ninkechi did, from dawn to dark. She drew the water and ground the pepper and swept the dust that blew in from the gold roads, no matter how often she chased it out. She washed the daughters' wrappers and oiled their hair and stood behind their chairs at meals, eating only when they had finished. Folake and Remy had made an art of her smallness. They corrected her walk. They mimicked her voice. When guests came, they introduced her as our Charity, and laughed behind their hands when she flushed. Madame Bisola's cruelty was quieter and worse. She rarely struck the girl. She did something that left no mark and never healed. She reminded Ninkechi, in a calm and reasonable voice, that she was nothing, that she came from nothing, that without this house she would be a beggar in the market gutter, and that gratitude was the least a creature like her could offer. Said softly enough, often enough, a thing like that becomes the wall a child measures the whole world against. Yet they had never managed to make her hard. In the privacy of the cooking yard, she hummed the little song her mother used to sing, a strange winding tune with words in no language she knew. Words her mother swore she must never forget, even if she forgot her own name. She fed the bones of her own small meals to the lame cat the daughters threw stones at, and every night, by touch in the dark, she opened the brass locket and pressed her thumb to the worn little face inside, the woman she could no longer quite remember, and she whispered, "Good night." Let me stop the story here for one breath, because what Ninkechi does in the next scene is the reason I wanted to tell you this tale at all. If you believe the world owes its quiet, overlooked people something better than it gives them, then tap subscribe now and walk the rest of this road with me. It costs you nothing. It means everything. Good, now come and see. Market day in Oka was loud with dust and bargaining, and it was there, between the yam sellers and the cloth stalls, that Ninkechi saw the boy. He was perhaps 10, ribs showing, caught with a stolen handful of groundnuts, and held hard by the wrist, while a fat trader shouted for the town guard and a small crowd gathered to enjoy it. The boy was not crying. He was past crying. He had the flat, hunted look of a child who knows the next part will hurt and has stopped expecting anyone to stand between him and it. And Kechi had 3 coins in her wrap, a half-year of secret saving. Hidden from the daughters, meant for nothing but the dream of one day buying her own freedom. She paid the trader for the groundnuts. Then she paid him again more than they were worth, to let the matter drop, and she pressed the last coin into the boy's filthy hand and told him quietly to go home, and to come find her at Madame Basola's gate if he ever had no one else. "Why would you do that?" the boy asked, staring like she'd grown a second head. "You don't even know me." "Somebody once did it for my mother," she said. "I'm only passing it on." The boy's name was Safu. He ran off into the crowd, and Nkechi thought that was the end of it. One kindness, 3 coins, a freedom postponed. She did not know that small, ribbed, grateful boy would one day be the only person fast enough and brave enough to carry the message that saved her life. The envoy from the north came to Oka on a gray mare, and the whole town turned out to watch him pass. Word of why he had come ran ahead of him through the market like a grass fire. A great house far up the Gold Road, the house of Adanre, no less, was seeking word of a lost girl, a granddaughter who would now be 16 or so, and was offering a reward in gold dust to any family who could bring true news of her. In a trading town, the word reward travels faster than any fever. By the time the envoy stabled his mare at the rest house, half of Oka was already inventing a lost cousin. Madame Basola did not invent a cousin. She did something far bolder. She decided that one of her own daughters would simply become the girl the gold was looking for. It was not as mad as it sounds. Nobody in the north had seen the lost child since she was an infant. There was no portrait the public knew of, no mark anyone could name aloud. Only a story, a rough age, and a fortune attached. A clever woman with 2 daughters of the right years and a houseful of fine cloth might, she reasoned, dress the prettier one in morning dark, coach her in a sad tale, and walk her in front of a tired old envoy hungry to carry good news home. So Bizola chose Folake, and the house turned upside down preparing her. For 2 days Nkechi ran herself raw at the edges of it, pressing wrappers, polishing beads, fetching and carrying, while Folake practiced looking nobly bereaved in the long mirror. The daughters did not trouble to hide the scheme from the maid. Why would they? She was furniture. She was the hands that brought the oil and took away the cold tea. A girl like that hears everything and matters to nothing. On the 3rd evening, the envoy was received in Bisola's best room, and Nkechi was sent in to serve. She kept her eyes low, as she had been taught, and moved along the edge of the lamplight with the brass tray. Bisola was talking, the warm, syrupy voice she kept for important men, guiding the envoy toward Folake, who sat draped in dark cloth with her hands folded just so. The envoy listened politely. He had clearly heard a dozen such daughters already on his road south, and his face had the patience of a man who expects to hear a dozen more. Then Nkechi leaned in to set down his cup. The frayed cord at her neck swung loose from her dress as she bent, and the little brass locket dropped into the open lamplight, turning slowly on its string between her and the envoy's face. It was only there for a breath. She caught it and tucked it back without thinking, the way she had 1,000 times. But the envoy had gone very still. He was not looking at Folake anymore. He was not looking at Bizola, whose voice ran on a moment before she noticed his attention had left her. He was looking at the cheap green locket on the serving girl's neck, at the worn shape stamped into its face, a shape he had seen pressed into hot wax at the bottom of his master's letters, a shape no cloth merchant's maid in a southern town had any business wearing. "Girl," the envoy said quietly, "come back here." The room changed temperature. Bizola's smile froze on her face. Folake's careful sorrow forgot itself, and Nkechi stood with the empty tray against her chest, certain she had done something wrong, bracing for the blame that always landed on her in the end. "That thing around your neck," the envoy said, rising from his seat, his eyes never leaving it. "Where did a girl like you get it?" She pressed her hand over the locket, her mother's locket, the one thing she had been told to guard with her life. "It's mine," she said. "It was my mother's. I've had it always." "Open it," he said. And Nkechi, with the whole room watching, and her heart loud in her ears, lifted the little tarnished thing she had opened 10,000 times in the dark, and opened it now, for the first time, in front of someone who knew exactly what he was looking at. The locket opened the way it always did, with the small, stiff click she knew by heart. And there, no bigger than a thumbnail, was the painted face. She had pressed her thumb to it 1,000 nights without ever truly seeing it. A woman's face, worn soft at the edges, the colors faded to brown and dust. To Nkechi, it had always been simply mother, a comfort in the dark, a thing to whisper goodnight to. She had never once thought of it as proof of anything, because she had never known there was a question to answer. The envoy looked at the little painting for a long, long moment. When he raised his eyes to her face, something in them had changed. He was no longer looking at a serving girl. He was measuring her cheekbones, the line of her brow, the set of her mouth, against the faded face in the brass. "Hold the lamp closer," he said, and his voice had lost all its road-weary patience. Nobody moved to help, so Nkechi lifted the lamp herself. The flame steadied, and the envoy bent over the open locket and the living face above it, back and forth, twice, 3 times, and the blood went slowly out of his cheeks. "This face," he said softly, almost to himself. "I have seen this face in oils, life-size, on the wall of my master's private room. He sits before it some evenings and speaks to it. It is the Lady Mornique, his daughter, dead these 16 years. He straightened. "And it is your face, girl, older, poorer, but the same blood looking out of the same eyes." The room had gone utterly quiet. Then Madame Bisola laughed a high, brittle sound, the laugh of someone watching a fortune slide off the table. "That filthy trinket," she said. "She stole it, most likely. The girl is a servant, a nobody I took off the street out of pity. If anyone in this house carries good blood, it is my Folake, madam." The envoy did not raise his voice, but it cut her off like a blade. "I have carried my master's seal for 30 years. I know his daughter's face the way I know my own hand. I am not here to be sold the wrong girl in fine cloth." His gaze moved to Folake, in her draped mourning, and then back to the maid with the lamp, and the contempt in it was quiet and total. "You dressed the wrong daughter." Folake's face crumpled. Bisola's mouth opened and closed on nothing, and Nkechi stood in the middle of it, the lamp shaking in her hand, understanding for the first time in her life that the floor she scrubbed and the name she answered to and the whole shape of who she believed she was, none of it might be true. That night, the envoy did not sleep. He sat writing by candlelight, and at first light he sent his fastest rider north up the Gold Road with a sealed letter, carrying news that would reach the great house of Idanre in 3 days. But news on the Gold Road is never carried by one rider alone. In the household of Chief Adawale, every letter that came through the gate passed first across the wide cluttered table of the man who ran the estate's accounts. The chief steward, Dauda, a smooth and tireless man who had served the family for 20 years and was trusted with every key, every ledger, and every secret of the house's wealth. For the last several of those years, while the old chief grieved and weakened, Dauda had been quietly moving that wealth. A caravan's takings short-counted here, a storeroom's tally softened there. Gold that flowed out under honest-looking ink and never came back. He had built his whole comfortable future on one simple certainty, that the line would end with the dying chief, that the fortune would scatter among distant, careless relatives, and that no one would ever sit down and truly read his books. a returned heir would read his books. So when Dada's clerk brought him the envoy's sealed letter, and he broke it open and read, in the envoy's careful hand, that the lost granddaughter of Idanre had been found alive in a southern town, wearing the matched locket bearing the dead lady's face, the steward did not rejoice. He sat very still in the lamplight, the way a man sits when he has just seen the exact shape of his own ruin walking up the road toward him. They came for Nkechi 4 days later, and Madame Bisola could do nothing but stand in her own doorway and watch the maid she had despised ride away toward the greatest house on the Gold Road. The journey north was the strangest of Nkechi's life. For 16 years, her world had measured a single courtyard. Now the dry country opened around her, mile after mile, the gold roads unrolling under the mare's hooves. The envoy, riding silent and watchful at her side as though she were something breakable he had been charged to deliver. She kept the locket closed in her fist the whole way. Whatever waited at the end of this road, that small brass weight was the only thing in it that had ever been truly hers. Idanre itself, when it finally rose out of the dust, did not look like a house. It looked like a town that one family happened to own. She was brought through a gate taller than any building in Oka, across a courtyard where fountains she would later learn to take for granted, through water into the dry air, and into a cool stone room where the elders of the household had gathered to look at her, not to greet her, to judge her. She felt the difference at once, the careful, measuring quiet of people deciding whether to believe their own hope. An old man was sent for. His name was Baba Isan, and he had made jewelry for the house of Idanre for 50 years. His hands shook with age, but his eyes were clear, and when they laid the locket in his palm, he handled it the way another man might handle a living bird. He turned it to the light. He weighed it. He ran a cracked thumbnail along its edge and pressed the catch and studied the faded face inside, and the longer he looked, the stiller the room became. "I made this," he said at last. The words dropped into the silence like a stone into a deep well. Not this one alone, the pair of them. 2 lockets made as twins, the same year the Lady Morenic turned 12. The chief ordered them so that mother and daughter might each carry the other's face. He turned the brass over, showing the worn crest. "This is my stamp. This is my work. I would know it among 10,000. A murmur went round the elders. Some of them looked at the girl now with wet eyes, ready to fall on their knees. But not all of them. And the doubt in the room had a quiet source, a smooth, sorrowful voice that belonged to the chief's most trusted servant. Dada had positioned himself near the elders, the very picture of a loyal steward grieved by his master's fragile hope. "Old Baba's eyes do him credit," he said gently. "But let us be careful, for the chief's own sake. A locket can be lost. It can be stolen, or sold, or won at dice, and carried 100 miles from the hand it left. That this is Baba's work, none here would doubt. That the girl wearing it shares the lady's blood. That is a far larger thing to swallow on the strength of a trinket and a worn little painting." He let his gaze rest on Nkechi, soft and pitying. "We have all seen how grief makes a hungry heart believe what it longs for. I would not see my master's last months built on a beautiful lie, only to be broken when the truth came out. It was cleverly done. He never accused her. He only worried, aloud, lovingly, in front of the people whose belief she needed most, and the worry did its work. Heads that had been ready to bow now hesitated. The old goldsmith's certainty, which had felt like the end of the matter, was suddenly only one voice among several. And Nkechi, standing in borrowed sandals on the cold stone floor, understood that the smooth, kindly man who spoke of protecting the chief was the most dangerous person in the room. She did not yet know his name was Doda. She did not yet know about the books. the short-counted caravans, the years of quiet theft. She knew only what her whole hard life had taught her to read in an instant, the face of someone who wants you gone. What she could not know was how far he had already decided to go to make it happen. What Dada decided that very night was that the girl must be discredited before the chief ever laid eyes on her. The old man was sleeping when she arrived. The cough had taken him hard that week, and the physicians kept him quiet behind a curtained door. That gave the steward a little time, and a man like Dada knew exactly how much a little time was worth. If he could make the household believe the girl a fraud before grandfather and granddaughter ever stood face to face, the chief's failing heart would do the rest. An old man can only survive having his hope raised and crushed so many times. He set to work the way he did everything, quietly, with ink and patience. There were two things in that house that could turn the elders' doubt into certainty, and Dada knew both. The first was the twin locket. Somewhere in the chief's locked chest lay the matching half of the pair Baba Isan had described, and if the two were ever laid side by side, identical down to the goldsmith's secret stamp, no amount of silky worry could explain it away. The second was Baba Isan himself, the one living man whose word on his own craft no elder could dismiss. So the steward moved against both. The chest was easy. He held the keys to everything in that house. Late that night, he let himself into the chief's strong room, lifted the twin locket from where it had waited 16 years, and slipped it into his own robe. A thing that cannot be found cannot be matched. He told himself he was only delaying it, only buying time, though a part of him already knew that a locket in a steward's pocket has a way of falling into a deep well and never being seen again. Baba Isan was harder because you cannot pocket an old man, but you can frighten one. The next morning, the goldsmith received a soft-spoken visit and a soft-spoken suggestion. That his eyes were old, that he could not truly be certain, that a wise elder would not stake 50 years of good name on a tired guess that might shame the chief before the whole district. And when he would not bend, the suggestion turned gently to his family, to the grandson whose apprenticeship the house funded, to the small, comfortable life that the chief's goodwill made possible and the chief's steward could quietly unmake. Baba Isan was not a coward, but he was old, and he was tired, and he was made to understand that speaking too loudly might cost the people he loved. By evening he had taken to his bed and would see no one, and Ketchy felt the net before she could name it. She had been given a small room and clean clothes and food she did not have to earn, and for the first day it had felt like a dream. By the second day the dream had begun to sour. The elders who had wept at the locket now passed her in the corridors with their eyes turned away. The kind goldsmith, who had held her mother's keepsake like a living bird, had gone silent and unwell. Doors that had been open were softly closing one by one, and she could not see the hand that closed them, only feel the cold air where warmth had been. By instinct, she did the only thing her hard life had ever taught her. She watched and she listened, and she made herself small enough to be forgotten in a corner. And so she was standing unseen behind a pillar in the account court when she overheard two clerks murmuring about the master steward. How strange it was that the old chief's gold seemed always to be just short at the season's count, and how no one but Dada ever dared check his figures. She did not understand what it meant. Not yet. But she understood this much. The smooth, sorrowful man who wanted her gone was hiding something of his own, something that lived in the house's books. And in that moment, with the doors closing around her, and her one proof vanished from a chest she didn't even know existed, a powerless orphan with no allies and no name began, very quietly, to think. The hand that nearly finished her belonged not to the steward, but to the chief's own brother. His name was Balagun, and he was the iron of the family where Adawale was the gold. A hard, plain-spoken man who had spent his life guarding the house's name and trusted feeling far less than he trusted facts. With the chief too ill to rule, the household's decisions had fallen to Balagun, and Dada knew it. A steward who wished a girl gone need only put his poison in the right cup. Balagun was the right cup. Dada did not lie to him. He had learned long ago that the truth, bent just so, cuts deeper than any lie. "Your brother is dying," he told Balagun quietly, "and the whole district is watching to see how this house carries itself." Now a servant girl arrives from the south, wearing an old trinket, and half the elders are ready to weep on her neck and call her heir to everything your family built. If we are wrong, if she is some clever orphan who found a locket in a gutter, and we raise her up before the chief is even in the ground, Idanre will be the laughingstock of every trading house on the Gold Road. Is that the gift you would leave your brother's name? Balagun heard exactly what Dada meant him to hear. Not love, not hope, risk. By the next morning he had made his ruling, and he made it like a man closing a ledger. The girl's claim rested on a locket and an old man's failing eyes, and that was not enough. Not for a house like theirs. Unless true and undeniable proof could be set before the elders by the time the chief woke and was strong enough to receive her, the girl would be sent back south at week's end with a few coins for her trouble and a warning never to trouble the house of Idanre again. It was, without anyone in that room knowing it, a sentence designed by the one man who had stolen the proof himself. Ninkechi heard the judgment from a servant in the passage, and the old, familiar cold settled over her, the cold of being decided about by people who would not meet her eyes. The locket she had guarded her whole life had brought her to the edge of everything her mother must have dreamed for her, and now a powerful man she had never met was about to send her back to the scrubbing brush, and there was no kind king, no weeping elder, no rescuer riding to the gate. There was only a frightened girl, a stolen proof she couldn't reach, a secret she didn't yet understand, and 4 days, so she stopped waiting to be saved and started to plan. Here is what Nkechi understood that no one else in that great house did. The smooth steward had built her whole downfall on the idea that the locket was her only proof. So she would not fight him on the locket at all. In truth, she carried 2 things he did not know about. The first was the song, the strange, winding tune her dying mother had made her swear never to forget. The words in no language she had ever placed. The second was what she had overheard in the account court, the whisper about gold that came up short whenever Dada held the only pen. She could not reach the chief. The brother had sealed that door. But she could reach the one man who had loved the chief's daughter longer than anyone alive. And on the 3rd night, with Sefu's help, the door opened, for the grateful boy from the Oka market had not stayed in Oka. He had followed the only person who was ever kind to him north along the Gold Road, sleeping in ditches, begging rides on caravans, and he had reached Idanre a day behind her. A ragged child draws no notice in a great house. He went where Ninkechi could not, carried word where she could not be seen, and it was Sefu who slipped past Dada's watching and brought the old goldsmith, against all his fear, to a quiet room before the elders had risen. What Baba Isan heard there changed everything. Kechi did not argue or plead. She simply sat in the gray dawn light and sang her mother's song. Low, unsure, the way you sing a thing you learned before you had words. And the old goldsmith, who had served the house of Idanre for 50 years, went white to the lips. "Where did you learn that?" he whispered. "My mother. She made me promise. She said even if I forgot her face, I must never forget the song. His old hands were shaking now. Child, that is no common song. That is the cradle praise of the women of this house. The oriki of the daughters of Idanre, sung over each girl child at her naming, passed mouth to mouth, mother to daughter, and never, ever written down. No servant could steal it. No thief could find it in a chest. It lives only in the blood that carries it. His voice broke. The Lady Mornique sang it. I heard her sing it at her own daughter's naming, the week before she fled. And no soul outside this family's own line has any way under heaven to know it. That was the proof the steward had never thought to steal, because it had never lived in a locket at all. By the time the household gathered that morning, word of the dawn meeting had spread, and Balagun convened the elders himself, hard-faced, to put the matter to rest one way or the other. He expected to send the girl home. Instead, he found the old goldsmith standing, restored to his courage, ready to swear before the ancestors to what he had heard. Baba Isan told them of the song no outsider could know. The elders who understood the oriki wept openly. The younger ones, who had only heard it described, fell silent with awe. And the doubt Dada had so carefully grown began, in front of him, to wither. The steward stepped in fast, reaching for the old argument. A pretty trick, he said. The girl could have learned a tune from anyone, anywhere. Then bring the twin locket, Nkechi said. The room turned to her. It was the first time she had spoken above a servant's murmur, and her voice did not shake. You all speak of a matching locket, made as a pair, kept these 16 years in the chief's own chest. Lay it beside mine. If I am a liar, the true one is still safe where it has always been, and you lose nothing by looking. She let the silence stretch, then turned her eyes, calm now, certain, onto the steward. Send for it. Unless someone here knows a reason it cannot be found. Balagun gave the order. Men went to the strong room, and they came back to report what only one man in that hall was not surprised to hear. The twin locket was gone from the chief's chest, and the chest had been opened with a key. And there were exactly 3 keys to that strong room in all the world, and 2 of them hung, that very moment, on the belt of the steward, Dauda. Every face in the hall came round to him slowly, like a turning tide. He opened his mouth. No bent truth came out this time, because there was no shape he could fold the facts into that did not end with his own hand in the chief's chest. The locket he had hidden to ruin her had become the thing that ruined him. They woke the chief gently and told him only that he must come. He was carried into the great hall in a chair, thin as a dry season, the cough rattling in his chest, and then his eyes found the girl standing in the morning light, and every other thing in that room stopped mattering to him. He did not ask for the locket. He did not wait for the elders to recite their proofs. He looked at the face he had grieved for 16 years, wearing his daughter's eyes, and he knew the way only blood knows blood. Sing it, he whispered. If you are hers, sing what your mother sang. And Nkechi sang the cradle praise of the daughters of Idanre, there in front of them all, and partway through, in a cracked and broken voice, the dying chief began to sing it with her, the same winding words, mother to daughter to grandfather, 3 generations meeting at last in a song that had never once been written down. That was the moment no one in the hall would ever forget. The naming rite came after, as the law of the house required, the elders calling the ancestors. The chief laying his trembling hand on her head and giving her back the name her mother had chosen at her birth. Not Nkechi. Olamide, my wealth has come home. The whole house bowed to her as the true and only heir of Idanre. But before the gold could be brought, before a single ornament touched her, the new heir did something that turned the bowing into weeping. She knelt, not to the chief, but to a ragged boy half hidden at the back of the hall. She drew Sefu out of the shadows by the hand, this child who had slept in ditches to follow her north and slipped past a steward's spies to open the one door that mattered. And she set him beside her where the whole house could see, and called him the brother fortune had given her. Then she crossed to old Baba Isan, took his shaking hands in both of hers, and thanked the man whose courage had cost him so much fear, raising him up before the elders who had once watched him, forced into silence. Not for herself did she weep, this girl who had every reason to. She wept for her mother, who had died in a poor market town still singing a rich house's song to a child she could not feed, and who had been right all along to make her promise. And the old chief, watching his granddaughter lift up the lowly, before she lifted a single coin of her own, turned his failing eyes toward the smooth servant who had tried to sell her back into the dust. The chief's voice, when it came, was barely above a whisper, but the whole hall leaned in to catch it, and not one soul mistook its weight. Dada did not wait quietly for it. He began to talk, fast now, the smoothness gone, of long service, of loyalty, of a misunderstanding that could surely be explained. The chief lifted one thin hand, and the talking stopped. On Olamide's calm request, the elders did the one thing the steward had spent years making sure no one ever did. They opened his books. They laid the true caravan tallies beside his careful ink, season by season, and the gap between them yawned wider with every page. Gold short counted, storerooms softened, a slow river of wealth that flowed out under an honest-looking hand and never came back. He was not put to death. The new heir would not begin her house with blood. He was stripped of his keys, his post, and every coin he had hidden away, and made to repay from his own hide what he could of what he had stolen. Then he was put out of the gates of Idanre to live by the work of his own two hands, the one fate for a man who had grown fat counting another's gold that he feared more than dying. The keys that had hung so proudly on his belt now opened nothing at all. Word travels fast on the gold road, and it reached Oka before the next moon. Madame Basola, when she heard the maid had been crowned the heir of Idanre, did not feel shame. She felt opportunity. She arrived at the great gate in her finest cloth, all warmth and open arms, ready to remind the dear child of the loving home that had raised her, and perhaps to mention, gently, what such devotion might be worth. Olamide received her herself. She let the woman talk, the way you let a pot boil dry. Then she asked one quiet question, whether Basola recalled introducing her to every guest for 16 years as the charity, and she sent the woman who had measured her worth in free labor back down the southern road with nothing in her hands to live out her days on the kindness of a town that had watched her give none. The old chief lived one more year, long enough to see his granddaughter learn the trade, the books, and the 100 small mercies a great house can afford when it remembers to. When he finally went to the ancestors, he went smiling, and Olamide ruled the house of Idanre in his place. Under her hand the gold roads carried more than ore. She opened a kitchen at the great gate that turned no hungry traveler away, the way one had once turned away her mother. She paid for the schooling of market children who could not read their own names, so no child of the poor would ever again be invisible the way she had been invisible on her knees in the dust. And every season she had the cradled praise of the daughters of Idanre sung aloud at the naming of any girl child in the district, because a song she had learned can carry a truth that gold cannot buy and thieves cannot steal. Sifu grew up in that house as her own kin. The boy who had begged rides on caravans to follow the only kindness he had ever known became, in time, the man who ran her caravans, trusted with the keys a steward had once disgraced. Baba Isan lived out his last years honored at her right hand, his courage repaid 100-fold. and the song her mother had sung in a poor market town, refusing to let go of who her daughter was, even when there was no bread. That song outlived them all, passed mouth to mouth, mother to daughter, down a line that had very nearly been broken forever. The elders tell it this way: by the fire, when the lamps burn low, gold dropped in the dust is gold still. The dust does not change what it is. It only waits, patient and quiet, for hands wise enough and hearts kind enough to lift it back into the light. So before you go tonight, carry one last question with you. Maid spent 16 years being told she was nothing, yet when the gold finally came, she reached first for a ragged boy and a frightened old man. Would you have remembered the small people who helped you the way she did? Tell me below. I read every single one. And if her story warmed something in you tonight, do one thing: follow, so the next tale finds you when the fire is lit again.